Welcome back to my Top 100 Board Games series as we are nearing the top of my list with the last set of 10 before the top 10, the numbers 11 through 20. I absolutely adore all of these games, and the theme for this set of 10 is stressful games. They are not particularly relaxing. Sometimes it's stressful due to the genre, sometimes it's because you're on the clock, sometimes it's just the way the game is designed. But there's definitely pressure in a lot of these games, so let's go right to the list. My number 20 is Spyfall, which is down 3 spots on my list. Its weight is about a 2 and plays 5 to 8 players, at least in this version of the game. There is another version of the game called Spyfall 2, which lets you play up to 12 players, which is... it works when you have that many players, but there are some rules changes. Spyfall is a social deduction game, and in Spyfall, you will be trying to figure out the one person who gets the card that says Spy. The spy is just trying to blend in as best as he or she can, and you do this by asking each other questions about the location you're at. So if you get a card that says supermarket, you know everyone else in the group has the card that says supermarket, except for the person who has the card that just says spy. So you're trying to ask questions about something to do with the supermarket. Is like, what do you spend your time doing here exactly? And say, well, you might purchase a thing or two, and that might be all you say. The reason why it has to be kind of vague, the reason why you can't give away too much information, is if the spy ever figures out where everyone is, they say, hey, we're at the supermarket. They immediately win, everyone else immediately loses. So you have to reveal that you kind of know where you are without letting on too much information for the spy. On the other hand, if you ask someone a question, it's like, do you see anything edible? It's like, no, why would I eat anything here? I mean, it's obvious this person has no idea that they're at the supermarket. You accuse them of being a spy, and if everyone agrees, and you got them correctly as the spy, everyone wins except the spy. So there's also a point system which you can decide to use or not use, as well as a timer, which I usually don't use, but you can use if you want to kind of keep your games going snappily. It's just a very flexible, easy to use game in a lot of different situations that I've introduced to a wide swath of people, and it's generally been very successful. It's fun. It's just that little dynamic of like trying to straddle the line of too much information and too little information, like letting people know that you know you're at the supermarket without giving away too much information that it's obviously a supermarket to the spy, because you're going to lose. Or if you give too little information away and everyone thinks you have no idea where you are, then you're going to get accused of being the spy, and you're going to lose that way. So it's the trick of straddling the line that's really interesting in this game, and it's been a favorite for a long time. Honestly, down 3 spots, it's at about the same place on my list as it was last time. That's not much movement, really. So I think I haven't cooled or warmed to this game. It's just sort of like, it's still Spyfall and it's still a favorite. So that is my number 20, Spyfall. There's a lot of different versions you can check out. I think there's even like time travel ones. Okay, so going from one end of the spectrum to the other, my number 19 is the Gallerist. The Gallerist is up 8 spots on my list, so that's definitely a riser. Its weight is a 10 because this is a really complex game, and it plays 1 to 4 players. So the Gallerist is a game about running an art gallery. You do so by moving a worker to one of 4 different places, and each of those 4 places that you can move your worker to will let you do one of 2 different actions. It doesn't sound so bad, right? The problem is, each of those actions, with a couple of exceptions, are mostly like 5 to 12 step processes. There's a lot involved in like just taking an action, and you kind of have to know, even if you don't have the steps memorized, you kind of have to know what they do in order to make a good decision about where to go and when. Because this is a game very much about timing. It's about when to do certain actions to boost your overall score, and when to bolster your resources, and when to start cashing in those resources, and when to cash those resources in at an inefficient rate because you just really need cash more than you need fame at a particular moment. It's an incredibly intriguing puzzle. And I don't think this is my favorite Vital Lacerda game. There's going to be another one coming up that I think I like better. But this one's still incredible, and I think it's one of the best Euro games I've ever played. It's just very, very limited in terms of the number of people that I can actually play this with. It's just, if I'm going to hoist this on someone, they have to be prepared for a heavy economic Euro game that's going to take multiple hours to play. And possibly 45 minutes to an hour to teach on top of that playtime. It's a pretty big commitment. I think it's sort of a game that's got me to rethink my philosophy for how I teach games, because I just generally have focused on trying to lay out all the information in a coherent and clear manner so that anyone who's paying attention to what I'm saying should be able to pick up at least the bare minimum scaffolding needed to get started, and then they can usually ask questions. Even if I already covered it, that's fine. You don't have to memorize everything I say in a teach. And then go from there. That's traditionally how I've taught. This is the game that sort of got me thinking, there's so much going on in here. Maybe I should just start trying to design tutorials built around trying to get people to actually engage with the mechanisms and teach them how to play it that way, rather than just trying to explain all the information up front, which is, again, like, for a game of this complexity, like, you're probably going to be sitting there for 45 minutes to an hour just to get what a person needs across. And even then, they probably miss some details along the way. It's a fantastic game. It's a game that I can only play so much, but it is a game I can play solo, and the solo mode is very clean and does not require a lot of upkeep, which is usually something that bothers me in solo modes, where you have to, like, essentially run an entire second player in order to play it. This one's very simple, and you don't have to think a lot about what you're doing on your opponent's turn. You just kind of do those steps, and then it's back to your turn immediately. So it plays very smoothly and very fast solo. So it's got that going for it. It's got just a tremendously intricate puzzle, and I think there's something to it where once I've gotten past all the mechanisms that I need to know how they work and how they interact, there just seems to be a clarity in playing it that I appreciate, that I think comes with the best designed Euros, no matter how complex they may be in terms of the number of rules that you have to learn. And for that, I am a big fan. This is a terrific game. I could see it possibly climbing into my top 10, though maybe not before another Vital Lacerda game that might be coming up on this very list. Just stay tuned. So it's one I would happily recommend to the people who have the patience and the gaming savvy to give it a shot. So that is my number 19, the brilliant Gallerist. The Gallerist. My number 18, and yes, it has to be my 18 and not my 17, is Seven Wonders. Seven Wonders is down 12 spots. Its weight is about a 5, and it plays 3 to 7 players, although it says 2 on the box, and again, it lies. Okay, so Seven Wonders is a game that's been around on my list, and often in my top 10 for a long time. You can tell from just, I think, looking at my copy that it's a little beat up. This is the first edition. This is not the second edition, which they came out recently. And from what I understand, you're not really missing out on anything, but you're not really gaining much either from the second edition, because mostly they just cleaned up the rules, and which don't affect me because I know the game pretty well. And changed the look of the cards so that the expansions are incompatible with each other, which is a bit of a problem because the Armada expansion, which I wanted to give it a try at some point, just came out, and I'm not sure I'm going to be able to find a Armada expansion that's compatible with my copy of the game, because they're all going to be compatible with the new second edition, of course. So, of course, they did that, and of course, maybe I'll just have to content myself with the 2 expansions that I do have in here, which are Leaders and Cities. But Seven Wonders is a game that I think gets mislabeled as a gateway game. It's not really. It's kind of a game that just gets used in gateway situations, and you can sometimes get away with it if people are willing to take on the complexity of the game. It's more complex than it is long. It's a middleweight game. It's not that the concepts are overly hard to grasp, but it's maybe a few steps more difficult than I would normally put on people who I don't know to have any experience or contact with hobby board gaming as it stands now. But I think the reason why it gets used in that situation a lot just has to do with the fact that it's so fast. It's once you've taught the game, once you've got everyone okay with the concepts, it can play in 30 minutes, and even if your players are slow, it's probably not going to take that much longer than that, maybe 40, if you've got a couple of slow players in it. And it's just a very enjoyable game with a civilization building theme, which I think plays very broadly to wide groups of wide swaths of people. It's just a very concise, targeted design of building a civilization by drafting a few cards, and it's very something that sometimes bothers me in games, which is that it's kind of overly balanced, where unless you really don't know what you're doing at all, which is possible, you're all likely going to end up within the same range of points as everyone else. Like, you should all be within a 10-point range, really. Sometimes a player will run away with things a little bit more, especially with the Leaders expansion that's involved. Sometimes, but like, if you're just playing the base game, you mostly should be pretty close to each other in terms of your final scores. There isn't a major jump you gain from having learned the game well, and that lets you crush other players. And I'm usually not a fan of that, because it seems to try to balance away just being better than other players, and I'm not a fan of when games do that. And it's a problem in the follow-up Seven Wonders Duel, a game I don't like, and that's one of the reasons I don't like it. But for whatever reason, it doesn't seem to bother me here that much. I'm willing to go along with it, and I'm willing to just sort of play a game where I know I'm going to be within 7 or 8 points of first and last place every time I play it. Almost every time, anyway. I think it's just a great game. I think the expansions, Cities is pretty good. Leaders is excellent, because Leaders gives you more to do early, which is a little bit of a problem with the base game. But I'm willing to play the base game if I'm playing with new players, and I normally wouldn't try to force them to play with the expansion right off the bat, because I think it's a little much already, so it doesn't need and here are these leader things that you also kind of need to know how the game works in order to play well. Letting you sort of just blindly play through the first round is actually a good thing for the learning curve of the game, with just the base game. And that kind of goes away with Leaders, which is good for experienced players, and it makes it more problematic for new players. I really love this game. I think it slipped a little bit. It's out of my top 10 for now, but I could see it coming back in. I don't know if I'll try to hunt down the other 2 expansions that are out for it, but I'm going to continue to use it with people who I want to introduce into a little bit more of the complexity and nuance that are available within games. And I would be happy to do so, even though I don't have the newest edition, because I think it doesn't make that much difference. I think the iconography is a little bit easier and clearer to read on the newer edition, but that's about it. So, highly recommend it. Once you've got a few games under your belt, it's definitely one of the first ones you should go to after that. Once you're like, okay, I think I've got Ticket to Ride and Carcassonne down pat. What else is there? The what else is there step should be, let's try Seven Wonders immediately. It's that good. So that is my number 18. Unfortunately, not my number 17, because it's just the way my list fell. Seven Wonders. I wonder if my cat's going to interrupt me again on the next number. Okay, so I'm late to the party on this one. This is Agricola, and this is my number 17. It's down 7 spots. It is weight is about an 8, and we'll play 1 to 4 players. So, okay, I'm late to the party with Agricola because there was a whole cycle. There was Agricola came out and everyone freaked out in around like 2007, 2008, and it was a big hit among gaming circles. And then several years after that, Caverna came out and was like, oh, this is Agricola, but better because it's like, you don't have to feed your children or they will starve and hate you forever the way you do in this one. And then some people were like, but I still like my children hating me forever for never feeding them. And then Feast for Odin came out, and then there were other Uwe Rosenberg games along the way. And it's sort of, the people that were enthusiastic about Agricola kind of just sort of spread out amongst the various different Uwe Rosenberg and other similar Euros that were out there. And then I came along and like, I didn't like the app. And then I played the actual game and I'm like, actually, I really like this. So, and this is like in the last few years when everyone's kind of been over Agricola for several years now. I'm not, because I just didn't play it until recently. And I'm a huge fan. It squeaked into my top 10 last time. It is not far outside of my top 10 now. It's a worker placement game that puts some restrictions on you where if you don't do certain things, you will be punished, and it's hard to do everything. If you can do everything, you get rewarded for it in major ways, in a big score, which can be a mere 40 or 50 points in this game. That can be a massive score. But it still rewards you. But you just have so many responsibilities. Like, I know the guys on the Secret Cabal podcast, I think, is the one I'm thinking of, call it misery farming, and that's fairly accurate because you're just forced to tackle these choices of when you want to do things and if you're going to be able to pull it off. And often pulling it off is a very much by the skin of your teeth proposition. But that's kind of why I really like it. I like games that are punishing, but you can find a way to overcome. If I get dinged for a few negative points here and there because I didn't quite fill out my fields quite as much as I should have, or I didn't get any pegs, or my house just isn't as upgraded as it could be, I'm okay. I can live with that. But I relish the challenge and the way it can differ from game to game just based on the cards that you're dealt, because those will give you special powers that incentivize very different strategies from each other, and you kind of have to adapt your game to the kinds of cards that you are dealt. But not all of them, because you have to decide which ones you're going to try to utilize and which ones you're just going to leave by the wayside, because you can't possibly spend enough time utilizing all the cards that you would have. If you do that, you just won't have time to do the other things that you need to do in this game. So the tension of what you have to do, this is why this list is stressful, because this is stressful. Gallerist is stressful because of the sheer complexity. Spyfall is stressful because when you're the spy, you just really don't want to be found out. And this is stressful because you've got these kids that you have to feed. Or you get dinged for major negative points because you have to go begging for food. I've never had that happen to me, but I've heard it's happened to people I know and love. Excellent game. If you haven't checked it out yet, you probably should, even if a lot of gamers have moved on to other games by now. That is my number 17, Agricola. Okay, so my number 16, I don't have a physical copy to show you here, not because I don't have them, but because it's a series of games and I just don't have any in the house right now. That is the Unlock series of games. They're just called things like Unlock Epic Adventures, Unlock Mythic Adventures, and so on. This is new to the list. Its weight is about a 2, and it plays 1 to 4 players, although every single play I've done of this has been at 2 players. Okay, so what are the Unlock series of games? They are essentially board game simulations of an escape room experience. You don't have victory conditions or points or like threshold to cross or like objectives per se. You're just trying to solve a series of puzzles, and if you solve the last puzzle, you've won the scenario. And then it's just a matter of how quickly did you do it, how few hints did you need to use. You have a deck of cards, you have an app, and there's an app specific to each version of the game. So if you're playing the Squeak and Sausage version, which is one of the early ones, you go into the Squeak and Sausage app, and it serves as a timer, but it also does some specific functions that are particular to the game that vary pretty widely from game to game. Some games use the app extensively. Others are just mostly you going through the cards and just using it as a fancy timer for the most part. It depends which scenario you're playing. They vary in quality, but the experiences as a whole have been so much fun, and one of the few things that has engaged my wife in any kind of gaming to the point where she's been the one who's pushed to play more of these, which is rare and unusual in my house. That it's produced some of my best memories of playing games, even though when you play one and you get to the end, because there's specific puzzles with correct solutions, once you've got that correct solution, you know how to do it, and you never can really play it again, because you can't, unless you can just cause yourself to forget how that puzzle worked, or just leave enough time that you don't really remember what the solution was. I don't think I can quite do that, as bad as my memory is. They are one-time plays, so it is a bit of a proposition, but honestly, a lot of my games I buy and I play 2 or 3 times, and it may sit on my shelf for a while after that, and then I might get rid of it and resell it for a few dollars down the road. I don't feel ripped off if I do that. I don't even feel ripped off if I buy a game, never play it, which happens occasionally, but most of my games I end up playing. And then I get rid of it. Some games I hold on to because I'm like, I need to play this at least once before I try to get rid of it. But the one-time play thing, it's just a different value proposition. Just because it's board game adjacent, this is not the exact same thing as paying for a board game and never playing it. It's an experience that uses board game-like materials, like physical cards and an app, but it's not the exact same thing. So the value proposition is, am I having enough fun to justify paying about like $13 to $15 per scenario, which is what it works out to be in the 3 packs that we typically buy to play them in? And for me, the answer is a resounding yes. These are tremendously fun and distinct experiences. There are some of them that are less good than others. There's only one I would say was actually outright bad. The rest of them were at least somewhat entertaining or significantly better than that. But it's sort of a cheat for me to even have this on the list at all, but they're close enough to what I think of when I think of the hobby of board gaming that I think it goes onto my list. But it's not the exact same value proposition, so I think it's worth it. If you try to go to a real escape room, you get more bells and whistles because you get the physical room there, but you also don't get the ability to keep it and then pass it along to others so that other people can have the same experience you just did. So I think it's actually a pretty good value for what you get. So the exit games aren't going to make my list because I just like the unlock ones a lot better. The exit games are much more inconsistent in terms of quality, and I usually just have 1 or 2 problematic puzzles from the exit games where I go, what? Why was that? That doesn't make much sense. So I wouldn't include them in here because they're just not quite as good, but there's certainly something to look at if you're interested in this experience, because they're pretty close. The only thing is you can't pass them along like you can pass along the unlock game. So that is my number 16, the Unlock series of games. Looking forward to the 2021 release of this series as well. I have one question for you for my number 15. How do you feel about eating fellow villagers. My number 15 is Ultimate Werewolf. Ultimate Werewolf is in exactly the same spot it was last time, which is remarkable considering I haven't really been playing it lately. Its weight is about a 2, and it plays in a range of like 8 to maybe 25 players at the most. Okay, so what you're doing in Ultimate Werewolf is generally fairly simple at the start. You have certain people in the group, and this is why you need a large number of players to play it, who are werewolves. They are in the minority, but they are picking off the rest of the villagers one by one. The problem is you don't know who the werewolves are. They're picking off people in secret. So you have to basically sort of read people, go off who the werewolves chose to kill, because, you know, you're probably having at least a couple of werewolves in your group, and they have to agree on a person. So if they kill me, why did they target me? Which people would make sense as people that would target me as the person that they wanted to kill off? That's the game. So it's fairly simple at the beginning. There's a seer who can once per round find out if someone is a villager or a werewolf, and everyone else is just generic villagers, and the werewolves are going to be posing as generic villagers. That's great. I really like that game. That's a lot of fun. It plays a large group, and it plays a range of players that a lot of my other favorite games simply do not. So it's kind of my go-to game if I have more than 10 people. But it gets more interesting once you start adding in a bunch of rules. I haven't even played all the different rules that are in this box. There are tons of them that I haven't even touched. But there's just a little description for each of these different kinds of cards. It says you can play up to 75 players. You couldn't play with this copy because I've lost some of the cards in here, so I actually can't play quite that number. But you wouldn't want to play with every single card at once. Good grief, that would be insane. There has to be someone who's the moderator. I'm usually the moderator because I enjoy watching the game as much as I enjoy playing it. And it's a different perspective to moderate the game, knowing what's going on and having no input as to how things are going to go. With one possible exception that I will have to tell. No, I'll tell it now. So one person was saying that they were the village idiot, and I just gently reminded the players that there was no village idiot, because we had played several rounds in a row. There was no village idiot in our round of the game. Just an FYI. So that person was obviously outed as a werewolf. So I just thought that little PSA would have been helpful, so that was put out there for the benefit of the players. It's the fact that things like that can happen is why this is so much fun. And the fact is, as you add in the different roles and you have more than just your standard complement of werewolves, villagers, and the seer, how those play off each other, how you can have like a role that like you're actually a villager but you appear to be a werewolf to the seer. So just like little wrinkles like that based on the different roles they play. I love this game. It's amazing fun, and if you have the right group of people who are willing to get into the mood of the game, get into the theme of like villagers lynching people they think are werewolves and going, oh, actually that was just a regular old villager. Whoops. It can be really funny, very entertaining, and quite tense. It's the fact that it's that combination is really what makes it unique on my list. Aside from just the fact that this is a game for 8 to 25 players, you know, so other than that, it's quite a unique role for it. Absolute favorite of mine. Would love to be able to play this more again sometime soon. That is my number 15, Ultimate Werewolf. My number 14 is Abyss. You'll have to take my word for it. Well, I can show you right there. Abyss, yeah. Abyss is down one spot on my list, so pretty much the same. Its weight is about a 5, and it plays 2 to 4 players. I think with one of the expansions, which I now own, you can technically play at 5 players, but it doesn't seem to be, according to Board Game Geek at least, to be particularly recommended. Okay, so Abyss is a game that I have trouble finding words for why I like it so much. It is a push your luck card game with sort of a currency element, and you're dealing with essentially a couple of different kinds of currency. You're dealing with pearls, which sort of grease the wheels of getting you things and getting things done, and you are dealing with I forget the word, but they're essentially allies that are in your hand, and you've got a hand of cards that you're holding, and that they serve as currency for recruiting lords. Lords get you points, they get you special abilities, they can get you locations, which can give you bonus points for having certain things in certain combinations. Lots of great things. But Abyss always ends quicker than you think it's going to. It doesn't seem like you've done all that much by recruiting a single lord. But as soon as someone's recruited 7 lords, that's the end of the game. So it doesn't seem like, okay, I take a turn, I recruit a lord, I've got 1 lord. That's a 7th of the game right there, though. And considering you've probably got other cards in your hand that will let you purchase other lords if you want to, or at least serve the basis for future purchases, you're probably closer to purchasing future lords than you were the first one. So the game sort of has a snowball effect of like ending quicker than you want. It's also got this interesting element where you can have special powers on your cards, but instead of lasting for the entire game, these special powers can be covered up by locations. Locations will give you big bonuses of points for having specific things during the game. But if you use the key symbol that's on some of the Lord cards, you have to cover them up, and you can no longer use that special power. So your special powers can be temporary. Temporary to the point where as soon as you buy the card, it gets covered up by a location, so you never get to use the power. And then there's the currency element and the fact that you can use them to sort of pay the difference that you need for specific cards, and the fact that you can keep some of the cards that you spend for Lord cards, but only the lowest valued one, or the one tied for the lowest valued one you use. And if you're using higher valued ones, like if you use 3 5s, that might actually make more sense, because in that case, you get to keep a 5 rather than one of the other ones, and that's worth 5 points instead of like 1 or 2. The push your luck mechanism, the expansion Leviathan adds a really interesting element where instead of an element where you just cash in fighting a monster for some rewards, there are specific things that attack you potentially, but you can also go after for rewards, and the cards that you use to go after them vary depending on which particular card that comes out, and the rewards also vary. I've played it once and I thought it was fantastic, and it sort of fixed what was probably the weakest area of the game. But it hasn't really had a chance to really impact my future plays of the game because I've only tried it once. I am wondering if this game might creep into my top 10, especially with that Leviathan expansion in there. The Kraken expansion also seems interesting, but I didn't like it that much at 2 because it just felt a little crammed. It's a terrific game. It always goes quickly. It feels like there's a lot of depth to it for what is essentially not an overly complicated set of rules. But it's just like, when is this going to end? Am I going to have time to do the things that I want to do? And how's my score going to be? It is a game that sort of straddles the line between being something overly balanced, like Seven Wonders, and being a game where you can just run away with things if you know what you're doing. By being halfway in between, it kind of captures enough of both worlds to work for me. This is just a game that I like everything that it's doing. It's a fantastic game. I would happily play this with just about anyone. I honestly just wish there was a solo mode, because this would be a great sort of not super heavy solo alternative, because a lot of my solo games are pretty heavy. I can't recommend this one highly enough. Maybe this should be the other game that you play right away after having gone through your Catans and your Carcassones and your Ticket to Rides. Maybe go to Seven Wonders and Abyss next. They're just excellent, and they're not going to overly confuse you once you've had a few games under your belt. So that is my number 14, Abyss. It's brilliant. Play it. My number 13 is Zolkin, which is down 5 spots on my list. Its weight is about an 8 and plays 2 to 4 players. Zolkin is an incredible strategy game at which I am terrible. You are placing workers, but you're placing workers on gears. You can either place a worker on your turn, one or more, but the more you place, the more you have to pay, or you can take workers off, at which point you gain the benefit, but the longer you leave them on the gears, because the gears spin one place each round, the better the benefit you get. And then there's just a lot of little intricacies in terms of how things work. I just don't know how to get the engine up and running well here, fast enough, well enough. And that's part of the reason why I just wish I had more people to play it with me on a regular basis so I could get better at it. But that doesn't prevent me from seeing and appreciating the tremendous amount of depth that is in this game. It is a game that rewards patience and planning and lets you set yourself up for incredibly strong turns in which you create a chain reaction where you get the resources you need, you cash them in for a benefit, and then you use that benefit right away in like 3 distinct moves on your turn. And to get there, you had to have set that up over the course of like probably 2 or 3 rounds, and then maybe waited for another round or 2 on top of that just to get everything in position. And the fact that it lets you pull off those satisfying combinations is remarkable. I just wish I knew how to actually race up the tracks that give you the points that are, the kind of the focus of how you actually win in this game. I just sort of get lost in the weeds trying to do some of the other stuff that can be done in the game. I just want to be able to pay for things with corn, which is the currency of the game. And so this is another game that I would play pretty endlessly if there was a solo mode available. I'm kind of wondering if it might not get a second edition, which includes one, because both of the sequel games, which I've already talked about on this list, Teotihuacan and Tekhenu, are both games that have a solo mode, although I didn't particularly like it in Teotihuacan. I'm just wondering, like, maybe it could be retrofit into the game. Maybe they can just do a solo expansion, because I just kind of need the practice, and I don't know who I'm going to practice this game with. It's excellent, and it's another game where there's just a limited audience. I know this is a game that one of my brothers absolutely hates. I think the other one likes it fine, but finds it very much like he seems to be worse at the game than I am, which is saying something. It's terrific. Should you play it? Probably, to give it a try, as long as you aren't someone who knows that you don't like heavier Euro games. As long as you are okay with the heavy planning aspect of it. If you want to play with the cool blue crystal skulls, that might be a reason to give it a try. It's excellent. I just wish I had more chances to play this with other human beings, because I really would like to get good at it. There's just too much game here to let waste away on my shelf, sitting lonely, never being played by its owner. Oh, well, that's my number 13, Zolkin. Okay, so I've put 3 Vita Lacerda games on my list. The last one I put at 18. This one I'm putting at 12. This is Vinos Deluxe Edition, which is a bit of a reworking of the original, although it includes the original version, which I haven't tried, in this box as well. It is up 10 spots on my list. Its weight is only a 9, so quite light for a Vita Lacerda game, and plays 1 to 4 players. Okay, so this might not be my favorite wine-making game. There might be another one coming up, but it's the gap is really small. This game just has so much going on in it, and yet I feel it is a more accessible game than the Gallerist, and definitely more accessible than Lisboa. I still have to try Kanban EV. I have it. I haven't played it yet, solo or otherwise. But this is kind of the game where it's like, if I'm going to try to introduce someone to the world of Vital Lacerda games and get used to the complexity and the mechanisms and the overlapping things and the way the worker placement mechanisms work in here, where it's usually just one worker, but there might be a twist on sort of how that one worker works as opposed to another worker placement games, I would want to start with Vinos, because a lot of what happens in Vinos is thematically sensible, where, okay, the wine ages, but do you have a cellar in which it can age in order for it to actually improve? If you don't, maybe it's just going to spoil, and you have to sell it at some point anyway. And then there's also things like the weather is thematic, where some years just produce better wine quality because the weather is more conducive to a good crop. And sometimes your wine quality can be so bad you don't actually produce any wine. There are little echoes in another game that I'm going to be talking about, not on this video, that are in this one as well, but it's a surprisingly different game from that other one, and it's certainly the heavier of the games. I haven't played this one as much as that other one, and that might be the only reason why it's lower on my list, but I think they're both fantastic designs and games that I'm very eager to play at any possible opportunity. I think I might be trying to push this game specifically as the game that I try to get people to play with me, to go, I am freaking out about this designer. I think this designer is a mad genius, and I think we should be playing all of his games as frequently as possible. But I think it's a little bit easier to see what's special about his design in this one than in the other two that I have on this list. And I'm interested to see where Kanban might slot in. Maybe I won't like it at all. Who knows? I just gotta give it a try. But for now, of the Vital Lacerda games that I've experienced, this is probably the one I would point you to as being the one to go give a try first. I think it's the best experience for new players, because while there's still a lot of complexity and a lot of moving pieces to it, most of them do make thematic sense, and there is a general flow to the game which is pretty manageable. It doesn't last nearly as long as you think it does. It's like 13 turns for every player, and then that's it. So, should everyone play this? No. But I think some people who don't think it's a game for them should still try it. So it's more of a case-by-case basis kind of thing. Anyways, my number 12, Vinos Deluxe Edition. Okay. My number 11, and honestly, this is a game I sort of regret not quite being able to cram into my top 10 somehow, is the exact opposite end of the spectrum of Vinos in terms of complexity. It's a little game, simply entitled The Mind. It is up 9 spots. Its weight is a 1, and it is for 2 to 4 players. You won't hear me complaining about needing solo mode for this one, because in principle it couldn't work, because the entire game is about trying to synchronize with at least one other human being. What you're doing is you have a hand of cards numbered between 1 and 100, with only one card representing each of those numbers in that sequence. You are trying to play them from lowest to highest, but you can't communicate. Now, whether or not that means you can't communicate at all and you have to do it in dead silence, or you just can't talk about like what's in your hand, I tend to gravitate more towards the latter interpretation of the rules. Like, why can't we talk about hockey or I don't know, the weather or something like that while we're playing this? We just can't do anything. And I'm not strict on body language. I can sort of broadcast, I think I'm ready to play this card, so I'm just going to slowly pull it out towards the table. But what you're trying to do is get it in sequence from lowest to highest. And if you make a mistake, someone has to say stop, and you show, oh, you played the 28, I actually had the 25, so I was supposed to play next. So we lose a life. Reset, keep going. But if you just run out of lives, that's it. You get some back for hitting certain thresholds in the game, which are dependent on late number of players, I think. It's always the same, but you don't play the same number of rounds depending on the number of players. And you get like the ability to sweep some cards, like everyone gets to sweep the lowest card from their hand if you use a throwing star. But you only have so many of those, and when are the right times to play them to kind of clear away some possible ambiguities? If you use it and you clear away a 26 and a 27 in two different people's hands, that's a good thing. But how do you know you're at a place where you should start using that? When is a good time to spend that? And then there's the fact of you just have to try to synchronize your sense of timing on how fast we're going through this number sequence. It's like, okay, I played the 12. Is that enough time to play the 18? And someone plays the 20, and you're like, oh. It's almost too simple for me to consider it to be clever in a way, where it's just the game is not like some intricate puzzle in the way that something like Vinos is. It's not a game that is particularly sophisticated or even has like emergent complexity based on how the pieces move together, where you just have a few simple rules like you would do in something like Go, and yet the complexity emerges in the ways that the different possible game states that they can make. No, it's none of that. It's just a very basic game of timing, but it's also incredibly fascinating, and it's a very interesting thing to do, to try to synchronize with your sense of how fast things should be going with someone else. I've won this only once, and it was in a 2-player game with my brother, and I think that only worked because, having been raised in the same house, we had a very similar sense of like how fast was normal. So it was possible for us to get through all 12 levels. But I love the fact that I can play this 4 players with another group of people, and we can barely get through level 2 or 3. Like, we tend to mess up really, really fast in those situations. It's a great game. It's absolutely not a game for everyone, but it is so simple that I think it's worth trying. And you know what? It's like $10-15. You could probably just buy it and see if it's for you, and if not, just give it to someone else, and that's not a horrible use of like $10 or $15. I really like it. It's a very recent favorite, but it's very near and dear to my heart now. That is my number 11, and the last non-top 10 game we're discussing, The Mind. So that was my number 11 through 20. I was very excited to talk about these games, and that was a lot of fun, I must admit. If there were some kind of mad scientist who decided to zap away from existence my top 10, I still would be pretty happy with these games as my top 10, but there are 10 games I like better. So, until the next and last video of this series, take care. Let me know what you think. Leave a comment. Send me a message. Whatever you'd like to do. And I will see you in the top 10. Bye-bye for now.